So in 2026, the United States hits a huge milestone, its 250th anniversary. I mean, a quarter millennium. It's this incredible moment to stop and think, to look back at this wild journey the nation's been on, and of course, to try and figure out what the road ahead looks like. Yeah, and this quote, it just nails it, doesn't it? It frames the whole American story perfectly. It's not just a country, it's an experiment. The Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress calls it an audacious endeavor. Think about that. It wasn't built on shared bloodlines or ancient history, but on a shared idea, an idea that's been changing and evolving from the very beginning. All right, so if we're looking back at this giant 250-year experiment, you gotta ask, right? What are the core strengths? What's the secret sauce that's defined America's success all this time? Well, when you really dig into it, a couple of things. These two big pillars just jump out. First, there's this relentless spirit of innovation. I mean, it's a thread that runs all the way from the pioneers pushing west to the tech wizards in Silicon Valley today. And then there's this incredible democratic resilience. The system has been pushed to the brink, over and over, but it was built with this idea of always trying to form a more perfect union. Always adapting. But okay, it's not all about celebrating the past. Let's be real. When you look at the expert forecasts, they're painting a pretty intense picture. The nation is facing some serious, and I mean serious, pressures as it heads toward that big 250 out. First up, let's talk about the economy, because the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, they've laid out the fiscal forecast for the next decade, and honestly, the numbers are pretty jarring. Get this, for 2026 alone, the CBO is projecting a federal deficit of $1.9 trillion. It's a number so big, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around it. But to put it in perspective, that's way, way higher than the average we've seen over the last 50 years. And of course, all those deficits just pile onto the national debt, which is growing fast. The projection is just staggering. By 2036, the total debt is expected to be 120% of the entire U.S. economy. That's a record breaker, folks. It would even surpass the peak we hit right after World War II. So you might be thinking, okay, big numbers, but what's the big deal? Well, this is the big deal. By 2036, nearly 5% of the entire American economy, the whole shebang, is projected to be spent just paying the interest on that debt. That's money that can't go to infrastructure or science or education. It's just servicing the debt. Okay, but here's where it gets even trickier. These huge economic pressures, they aren't happening in a vacuum. They're hitting right at a time when the country is, well, deeply divided. And these divisions are so deep, they're actually changing how we see the economy itself. Some really fascinating research from the London School of Economics shows that since the 90s, how Americans view economic inequality has completely split along party lines. We're not just talking about disagreeing on how to fix the problem. We're talking about disagreeing on what reality even looks like. And this timeline is just wild. Look back at 1992. See how close those lines are? Back then, Democrats and Republicans pretty much agreed on whether the rich were getting richer. But then, watch what happens. By the early 2000s, this massive gap opens up. And what the research points out is that this chasm was driven almost completely by a big shift in perception among Republicans. So all of this division sets the stage for what could be a really volatile 2026 midterm election. You've got history on one side, which almost always says the party out of the White House does well, and Republicans feel they have an edge on issues like immigration and crime. But then you look at recent special elections, and you see this incredible surge in Democratic voter energy. It's shaping up to be anything but predictable. And just to make things more interesting, all this stuff happening at home, the economy, the political divisions, it's all happening while America is trying to navigate a world that's getting more and more complex and a lot more competitive. Trends Research has this interesting take on 2026. They call it a year of delayed political impact. What does that mean? Basically, the old international system, it's not stable anymore. We're in this fragile, kind of messy transition to what they call a multipolar world. In other words, it's not just one or two superpowers calling the shots anymore. It's a new game with a lot more players. And this table from the IMF really puts that in economic terms. Just look at the growth forecasts. You see emerging and developing economies are set to grow at over 4%. Now, compare that to the US at around 1.8%, or the Eurozone, which is even lower. That growth gap is a huge piece of this new shifting global puzzle. So what's driving all this? Well, there are a few huge factors. For one, the US-China competition is only getting deeper. Old alliances, both for security and economics, are being completely reshaped. And there's this really troubling trend away from careful diplomacy and toward what analysts call geopolitical brinkmanship, basically countries pushing each other right to the edge. And thrown into this mix is AI, which has gone from just being an economic tool to a serious instrument of strategic power. So you step back and look at the whole picture, and what do you see? It's this incredible contrast, isn't it? On one hand, you have a nation about to celebrate this amazing legacy of ideals and resilience. And on the other, you have the cold, hard reality of these massive challenges, both inside its borders and out in the world. You know that founding promise we talked about at the very beginning? That spirit of innovation, that democratic resilience? It's really facing a historic test right now. Can it actually hold up under the combined weight of all this? It's one thing to have huge fiscal pressure. It's another thing entirely when you're so politically divided that you can't even agree on how to start fixing it, all while the world outside is getting less and less stable. And that really is the ultimate question, isn't it? As America heads into its next chapter, its next 250 years, which is it going to be? Will this era be defined by the fractures pulling the country apart? Or by that same resilience that, for 2.5 centuries, has somehow, against all odds, managed to hold it together?